do this. Okay. So Eric, we have here with us Janet, Orire, Molly, Ellen, and Chibom, Betty. I don't know if I'm missing anyone. I think I said everyone's name thus far.
So we said Nigeria, Ghana, Rwanda, right?
Yes, and Cameroon actually. So
Cameroon. Okay.
Yes, Anchi and Betty are in Cameroon, so we're really excited about that. We have someone from Nadine from Rwanda just joining us as well. So Eric, they know so much about you. I think it goes without saying, right, that you're one of the most pivotal voices in the Africa-China relationship. They wanted to know how you got started in this work, what you care about. Nadine, I'm going to mute you. What's important to you in this space? And then, we'll save the next 30 minutes for you to speak with them, and then the last 30 for them to ask questions.
Okay, that's exciting. And just one quick question: is everybody a student, and they are high school, college? What level?
Everyone is a student at the university level, at the college level. Yes.
Okay. Okay, well, let's get started. Bonjour à tous. Hello, everybody. This is really exciting for me to be able to join you guys today. And Bridget and Sylvester, what an honor to be a part of this. And also, Africans on China is killing it. I mean, the site is so good. It's gotten there's so much content. And I'm so excited because one of the things that we need in the space is more voices. We need more discussion. We need more perspectives. So, a couple things that I'll say before I get started with my talk. I believe that if you are more confused today about the China-Africa relationship at the end of our discussion than when we start right now, then I have done my job properly. Okay, now I know that sounds completely counterintuitive, but the problem is with a lot of people is they come to the China-Africa relationship with their mind already made up. It is either this, that China is colonizing Africa, or Africa is the victim here, or China is the best thing that's ever happened to Africa. China is the worst thing that's ever happened to Africa. And the approach that I take on this, and I really encourage all of you to take, is to keep an open mind. The good and the bad in the China-Africa relationship sit side by side one another. If we want to write about stuff that's only bad about the China-Africa relationship, everything that we would probably write would be true. If we want to write things that are only good about the China-Africa relationship, everything that we would write would also probably only be true. So you can actually make the case either way, and that's one of the difficulties. So when we talk about how did I start the China-Africa project, let me give you a little bit of the background story, and then I'll go into also some of the media production side, because really at the end of the day, as the AOC community is showing, there is no excuse really short of, well, the only excuse you have is you don't have good internet connectivity, but even is getting tough because there are internet cafes everywhere, and that's getting to be a harder excuse. But other than internet connectivity, if you've got connection to the internet, which all of you today do because you're here with me, then there is no excuse for you not to be doing something, okay? So let's start. Back in my background is that I started journalism a little bit before you did. So I went to a high school that had a radio station. I also started studying Chinese when I was 15 years old. Now, this was way back in 1985, long before you were even a glimmer in your mama's eye. I was, so I'm really old compared to you guys. But back in high school, I started studying Chinese. And then my high school had a radio station, a little tiny, small radio station. And that for me was the chocolate and the peanut butter that came together. That was what made the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup, which was the special kind of combination of being able to tell a story that others really didn't know very much about. But at the time I wanted to be in music. I wanted to be a DJ. I didn't want to do anything related to news. I then went and got an internship at a radio station. And they said at the radio station, we have nothing in the DJ music side. We only have in the news side. Now, this news side was in 1989, and it's really interesting because the year 1989 is a lot like the year 2020, which is one of these years where history just completely changed, and it was one of these years which we will never forget. We will never forget 2020 for all the different things that it's brought us. And people never forgot 1989. A couple of things that happened in 1989. The Berlin Wall came down, the end of the Soviet Union. Nelson Mandela got out of jail. These things were happening one after the other, and it went on like this all year. And it was one of these years that just put a passion in me about the news. And I'm hoping that 2020 will do the same thing for you, which is this idea of helping people understand the world around them. So I started doing this internship, and I just got the love of storytelling and journalism and production and news. And one of the key things that a journalist way back when I was 19 years old, so a little bit younger than you were, he said that he asked me, how much am I reading every day? And I said, well, I read a little bit, but he said, you have to think that if you want to be in the storytelling or in the journalism business, it's like being Michael Jordan in basketball. Michael Jordan just didn't show up at the Chicago Bulls and started playing with LeBron James. He trains 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day to get there. And even when he's at the top level, he is training 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And for us as storytellers, our training is reading. That is the core thing. If you don't read, then you are in no position whatsoever to be able to tell anybody else about what's going on. And especially in today's world, where there is so much misinformation, partial information, fake information, biased information, sorting through what's real and what's not is incredibly difficult, even for the most experienced person to be able to sort through. So I've had 30 years now of studying Chinese affairs and 15, 20 years of studying African affairs. And I put together this newsletter and podcast and the website every day, and I am struggling with it. And that is no reflection on me, and it's no reflection on you. It's just really difficult today to figure out what's what. The best way you can do that is you have to read every single day. So just to give you an idea, I work about 12 hours a day. And over the course of the 12 hours a day, from about 6 in the morning till 6 at night is what it takes me to put the China Africa project together every day. But over the course of that day, outside of that time, and in the 24-hour period of my life that day, I'm reading 3 hours a day. So I read about an hour and a half on my own before I start working. And then over the course of the day, I'm reading about an hour and a half putting the stories together. And if you don't read, you will not be able to tell other people what's going on. And this is really the most important takeaway lesson number one. I learned it when I was 19 years old, and the habits that I built when I was 19 are still with me today. And I mean reading, and not just reading Facebook and Twitter and going through social media. You need to do deep reading. And what that means is that on the weekdays, you're doing a little bit of a faster scan. But on the weekends, you're printing out stories, you're spending more time, you're reading books. Now, I know that seems kind of weird, but I read one audiobook a month, and I'm reading about topics that are often totally unrelated to China, Africa. So you can understand how things connect together. So I'm studying right now a lot about Brazil and Brazilian telecom. And one of the things that I'm noticing is that the same discussions that are going on in your countries today about Huawei are going on in Brazil today. And by reading and thinking about the world in a bigger way, it makes it really important. And one of the difficulties that I find in the African space is that in the African discussion, there is this mindset that says Africa is special. Africa is different. What happens here doesn't happen anywhere else. And that's a mistake. And it's really a big challenge, because one of the challenges I see for African stakeholders is to see beyond their world and to look at what's happening here in Southeast Asia, to look what's happening in South America, and to see how you can draw from the lessons and the experiences. I'll give you a quick example. Last week, I had the opportunity to speak with 3 Caribbean prime ministers, and from CARICOM, which is like the African Union. And they were very gracious and wanted to kind of learn from me about what's happening in the China-Africa relationship. And what was amazing to me was they said, we have nobody in our foreign ministries who knows anything about China. And that's their concern. And I said, I was very polite because they're honorable excellencies. But at the end of the day, I said, shame on you. I said that would have been an excuse 15, 20 years ago. But China today is the world's 2nd largest economy. It's the largest navy in the world. It's the largest market for about almost everything. And the fact that you have not prepared for this day is your responsibility. And I see the same thing happening in Africa today. African governments and African companies do not have enough China expertise there to understand what's happening. And it's one of the reasons why Africans are getting the short end of deals and short end of the sticks, because they don't know who they are talking to. And so by reading and understanding and really diving into these things, you will be able to inform yourself, but more importantly, you will be able to play a critical role that is missing in Africa today in helping others to understand this important geopolitical relationship that for the rest of your lives is going to shape the outcome of your country's destinies. There's no doubt that China is going to be an incredibly important player in your country's destinies. And if people don't understand what's going on, then that's going to be a real problem. So I started, and my pathway was I was going to go to be a China journalist. I decided when I was in my early 20s that I was wanting to be a foreign correspondent in China, and that was it. So when I was in Hong Kong, I was doing an internship in 1990. And again, I told you about what happened in 1989. The Berlin Wall was falling and communism was going down. And one of the things that struck me, and one of my producers told me, he said, you know, it's interesting that all people are talking about is what's going on in Europe. Nobody's talking about what's going on in Africa. And communism was falling in Africa, and Africa was also going through this incredible change. And I thought that was really interesting. And I started to recognize a little bit of the biases that are inherent in the international news coverage, that there's a bias towards whites, there's a bias towards Europe, there's a bias towards the United States, and Africa oftentimes just forgotten. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. So then one night I was at the Foreign Correspondents Club, and in Hong Kong, that's a really famous place where journalists get together. And they're sitting there like angels descended from heaven, were 5 of the most famous foreign correspondents in the world. And they were having a drink there. My gosh, this is my moment. I was going back to college, so I have to meet these guys and I just have to ask them, I don't know what to say. So I went up to them and I said, hello, my dream one day is to become you. How do I do that? And they all kind of looked at each other. And these were old guys. They're kind of like my age now, but they were old back then. And they said, whatever you do, don't study journalism. I said, okay. And that didn't expect that. They said, the most important thing you can do as a journalist is that you have to have something to say. Study art, history, politics, science, you name it. Study anything. But journalism, you will learn on your own. You can learn, they will teach you on the job. Journalism is not something that a school will teach you. You can learn more about journalism and media production today from YouTube than you can by going to school and doing it. So I said, that was really interesting for me. So I went back to college, and when I got to school, I looked through the course catalog, and they said, and I said, I'm going to take their advice, and I'm going to study something that's not journalism or communications or production, and I'm going to study African history, East African history to be specific, because you know what? I'm never going to use this information ever again in my life. But I thought when my producer told me about how the coverage of it was so biased towards Europe and no one was talking about Africa, that let me find out a little bit about Africa. I just thought it'd be interesting. Never expected that all these years later, my life would be shaped by Africa. So I get a degree in East African history, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. That's my degree at Berkeley is in East African history. The day I graduated, I went off to the Associated Press and I became a Beijing correspondent for the AP in Beijing. And that was, my life was started. Now, how I got there was really interesting. And I think this is also super important for you, is that by the time that I graduated school, okay, when most people are starting their careers, I had already had 4 or 5 internships. I had 1 or 2 paid jobs. And so by the time that I graduated, I was being viewed, my resume, on a professional level, not at a student level. Very important difference. So number 1, you should be trying to get internships everywhere you can. And a lot of the internships today now are online, actually. They're not even in person because of COVID. So applying to newspapers, applying to radio stations, production, whatever it is to get real world experience is going to be so important, okay? In fact, I would say that as somebody who's been hiring young people now for 25 years as a news manager, as a production manager, as a station manager, I don't really care what school you went to. And I know that almost anybody in the business doesn't care. So a lot of people, they're like, they focus so much attention on the name of the school, the brand of the school. Is it the best university for this? Honestly, in the media business, we don't care. Okay. I'll be really honest with you. What we care is what you've done and what you can do. Because our business right now is a business of actually doing stuff fast. We don't have a luxury in the media business today to train you to do anything. So if you come in out of school and you want to get a job in a newspaper, TV, digital site, they're not going to train you, okay? Because they don't have time to train you. And what they do is they have the luxury now of being able to pick only the people who come to them ready to go. So if you're not ready to go on day one when you're applying for a job, you're not going to get a job right away. You don't have to spend the time getting experience. So you have a luxury right now, an amazing opportunity that you're in school. You have a platform like AOC. You also have a platform like China Africa Project. You have a number of different platforms that you can contribute to, okay, to get that experience into doing things. So number one is get internships. If you can. If you can't get an internship, number two is to find the opportunities for you to be able to write, like on CAP or on AOC. Number three, and this is the most important, okay, and this is where I come to the excuses. The most important thing that you can do right now is start your own blog, your own social media, your own YouTube, your own TikTok, all of it focused on professional, not your personal stuff. Okay, that's a separate social media profile. So you have your Facebook page that's you personally. Now you want to create your own professional Facebook page that is, on news or something with storytelling, whatever interests you. It doesn't matter the topic. Okay? Don't obsess or worry about the topic, because what people want to see is that you know how to do it. You can pick a topic that gets you excited every single day that you get out of bed. Okay, so if it's fashion, if it's art, if it's football, if it's whatever it is, what we're looking for when we're trying to hire you is, do you understand how to write? Are you consistent? Are you dedicated to this? Do you understand social media? The differences between writing for Twitter, writing for Facebook, writing for LinkedIn, writing for the web. Do you understand how to do podcasts? Do you understand how to be a YouTuber or a TikToker? Do you know how to measure the analytics in Google or in Facebook? That's what we're looking for. The topic, whatever. Who cares? Okay. We just want to see that you can actually do things, because there's something called the 99-1 rule. Okay. The 99-1 rule is a very, very simple rule. And it's been true from the beginning of the internet. 90% of the people on the internet today are consumers of content. That is, they read other people's stuff, okay? That's probably most of you. That's probably most people around, 90%. 9% of the people on the internet today are what they call as editors. That is, they post a comment, they share, and they engage in content. Believe it or not, only about 9% do that. Only 1% of the people on the internet today are content creators. Okay, so automatically by you creating content, you put yourself in the 1%. Okay, and a lot of young people complain about the dilemma that they have, that when they go out looking for a job, they're in this dilemma. And the dilemma is that the job says it wants experience. And you say, well, how can I get experience if I can't get a job? Okay, but that is there. We have no excuse anymore, because the internet has made it possible for you to make your own experience. Okay, so you can start your blog. And I remember when AOC even started, a year or two ago, and it was super simple. And CAP as well, really simple. Okay, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be super beautiful. It just has to be going. And the 0 to 1. Getting started is the most difficult thing. The 2 to 99, when you scale something up, that's the fun part. That's the easy part. But actually getting started is super difficult. Okay, so I go back to college. I'm studying African history. I get a job after I graduate, and I go off to China, and I start a journey of 10, maybe 15 years of covering China. China, 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 as my former president used to say. China, 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 China. So, and that was my life. I was going to be on a pathway towards China. My brother moved to Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So in 2005, he said, why don't you come out for Thanksgiving and just have Thanksgiving dinner with me? And I said, okay, that'd be cool. So I go out to Kinshasa in 2005, and there's one Chinese restaurant in downtown Kinshasa. And I thought, that's kind of cool. It just proves the point that there's a Chinese restaurant in every city in the world. I go, I take a picture, and I send it to my friends in China. I say, look, there's a Chinese restaurant in Kinshasa. In 2006, he invites me to come back. And he says, why don't you come back for Thanksgiving again? Okay, I come back. There are 2 Chinese restaurants in Kinshasa now. And I thought, that's interesting. Picture, off we go. 2007, 8, and 9, I went back to see him every year. And at 2007, something incredible had happened, and something that all of you have seen. The Chinese population and the presence just went boom. It was just, they were everywhere. There were Chinese construction sites, Chinese people, Chinese stores. And it was just like, what happened here? Okay, we went from 1 restaurant, 2 restaurants to just, wow, okay? And I thought, wow, this is so amazing that something is happening here. Something big is happening here, okay? Oh, I got to turn on a light. Sorry, it's getting really dark. Sorry. And I said something really big was happening here. And I'm reading in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and I'm reading in the Western press and the media about that China's colonizing Africa, China's taking over Africa, China's conquering Africa. And I thought, okay, well, that's what I know. And I'm used to reading these guys. And I thought, okay. And then I get to Kinshasa and I start talking to the employees of my brother's company, the Quinoa. And I say, what do you guys think of the Chinese? And they gave me these really complicated answers. They said, well, on the one hand, I love the infrastructure. I love the investment. I love the energy that they brought. I love the fact that we're no longer as dependent on Europe anymore, on France and Belgium anymore, which everything used to come from Belgium in the Congo. And now all of a sudden the Chinese are there and we feel like people are taking us seriously. But on the other hand, I don't like the fact that there's a lot of cheap imports. I see some Chinese workers here. I don't like the fact that we're borrowing so much money. And they had these really complex things. And I went, okay, that's really interesting. Then in 2010, I moved to Kinshasa to run my brother's company. And I start going out to talk to both Chinese and Quinoa. And I start asking them, what's life like? And again, I'm thinking about how the Chinese media is saying, everything's great, win-win. It's wonderful. We're the best thing that's ever happened to Africa. And then I hear continually the Western press, the US European press saying that, everything's terrible. China's awful. China's taking over. China's victimizing. Here we go again. Colonialism 2.0. And I'm like, ugh. And I remember my former employees, that space in the middle, that complexity, that gray that they were talking about. And I said, that's my story. So I said, you know what? I'm just going to start writing down some of the things that they say, mixing in the good and the bad. And that was when the China Africa Project got born. I started just writing a blog, a simple on blogger.com, which was, I don't think it exists anymore, and I would go talk to Chinese shop owners. I would go into the townships outside of Kinshasa where I would see Chinese construction projects. I would ask the locals at the market who were selling Chinese products what they thought. And I started giving all of these complex stories that were so different than the narratives that we were seeing in the media. After my job finished in Kinshasa, I moved up to France to work at Radio France Internationale, RFI, and then France 24 as well, France 24. And I was the editor-in-chief and the rédacteur-en-chef at France 24, at France 24. And I remember in the editorial meetings where I said, I come with this mindset of like, there's a lot going on with the Chinese in Africa. And I remember bringing it to these all white editorial meetings, only white people. And I say that because RFI and France 24 were obsessed, and they still are obsessed in covering Africa. That is their main priority. And every time I brought a China story up, they just dismissed it. They said, oh, the Chinese, all they want to do is colonize Africa. which I thought was rather ironic coming from a French government media channel, but okay. And they just dismissed everything. And I was so frustrated by the fact that RFI and France 24 would not cover anything related to the Chinese in Africa. And every time they did, it was only about how awful the Chinese were in Africa, which I thought, okay. And I don't care about the Chinese that I want to get them good coverage. I just didn't think there was that complexity that I saw in Kinshasa. So I come home and I say to my wife, I say, I can't get stories on the air about the way I want to tell the story. And then we came up with the idea, said, well, we don't need them. Why don't you just start your own podcast? Now, this was 2010. So very few people were using podcasts, but I said, okay. And so I just started doing a show where I just called up people and I said, can I ask you, talk to you and record it, and I'll put it out as this thing called a podcast. And from 2010 to today, I've done 560 episodes. We do 2 episodes a week now, and we do 50. We did 50 shows a year, and then we upped it to 100 shows a year now. So we do 100 shows a year now. But when I did it, I thought I'm going. How many topics can you talk about, right? I mean, eventually you're going to run out, and lo and behold, you're never going to run out because there's so much to talk about. And at some point I became too busy with being the editor-in-chief and doing China Africa project. So I went out onto Twitter and I said, does anybody want to help me do this podcast on China Africa relations? And this guy in South Africa, he said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And Cobus van Staden and I, from then, that's how we met, was on Twitter. And we just off and ran, and we used only the tools that came on our Apple computers. And all of the tools that we use to make all of the content come on PC and Apple are all free. So you can download open source. There's nothing that we use that you can't get for free, okay? And so then it expanded from the podcast to, then we opened a Facebook page, then a Twitter page, then we have a website, then we had SoundCloud, then we have YouTube, and now we have a daily newsletter, we have weekly newsletters, and it's turned into this big thing with 1.5 million followers on social media. We have 50,000 downloads of the podcast. We have paid subscribers to our newsletter, and then we've got thousands of subscribers to our free newsletter, and it's become this thing. But at the heart of it is still the same mission, and it's the same mission that AOC has as well, which is we don't take a side. Okay, I'm not here to be pro-Africa, pro-China, pro-America, anti-whatever. That's not my job. And I don't think it should be your job either. A lot of people will say, I want to be, pro-Africa, pro-Rwanda, pro-Cameroon. I don't think that's a good idea, because we need to have an honest discussion about the shortcomings of all sides in all of this. And if we say that we're pro-Africa or pro-whatever, then it creates some blinders to you. Now, again, we can be very in the topics we choose and the topics we cover and how we cover it. But by giving good, impartial analysis from your own lived experience, you will be pro whatever you want. That's the most important thing. So for us, part of the success, especially for 2 white guys doing China and Africa, which is sensitive territory, I'll be honest with you. The Chinese do not take well at all to foreigners kind of, commenting on them. And Africans have a long, rich experience of having white people kind of be awful to them. And so this has been treacherous territory, but the way that we have been successful is by being very, very humble. And we don't pretend to be the experts. We don't pretend to have the answers. We want to make sure we are as inclusive as possible of everybody. So if you look at our podcast guests, we try about 90% of our podcast guests are young, are female, are from the impacted countries in China and Africa. And we do have a few white people, but not that many. But again, it comes through our humility that we're not trying to be the, this is it, we're the experts. And when people like Bridget come to us and say, we want to start a site, our attitude is, yes, let's help you do that. And a lot of other people are being very competitive to think, well, you're doing the same thing as I'm doing, so I don't think I should help you. And we see the success in all of this is that if more people are talking about it, if more people are thinking about it, and so that's been one of the reasons why we've been successful to date, and we have to always stay humble. And we get criticized, And when people criticize us, we really listen to what people have to say. So people will say, you are so wrong. As long as you are respectful, you're not rude, and you don't demean anybody, we will have a great discussion with you. And we don't want you to necessarily agree with us, but we do want you to have a great discussion with us. So our goal is not to persuade you to do anything. Okay, it is 30 minutes on the dot. I could keep going for the next 2 hours, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions and answers. We can talk about the story, China, Africa. We can talk about production. We can talk about career, some career tips. We can talk about what to study and what to read. So I can be happy to answer any of those questions for you. Anything you want to ask, I'll be able to hopefully be able to give you some insight on.
Thank you so much, Eric, for that introduction. I took so much away from that. Even though you did a session like this last year as well, it's always so revealing for me to hear from your background and experience. Before I throw it out to the students, I just wanted to, a couple of folks joined us a little bit later on, and I wanted to kind of get your perspective on this as I kind of usher them in and help them, folks, get your questions ready. That's all I'm saying at this time. One of the things that I see from a lot of their backgrounds is their interest in business or in entrepreneurship or in economics and diplomacy, right? Which is directly aligned with a lot of what you've talked about. But perhaps I imagine some of them are not thinking necessarily of the media path. So I wanted to get your take on, how do they begin to think about it, the relationship between all of these things that we've discussed, right? In the sense that amplifying your voice doesn't necessarily need to be because you're only a journalist. It could be that, right, you have an interest in entrepreneurship or in
Right.
so I just wanted to see if you
Yeah.
could comment on
So
that. Yeah.
I come at it from a journalism point of view because that was my interest. But one of the
Mhm.
most interesting things is that you'll see people who are in science, in art, in technology, and whatever, and they will have a great Twitter feed or a great LinkedIn feed, or they will have a blog or even a podcast to some extent. So people will say, well, are you a journalist or are you an entrepreneur in business? And there's the line between those two is completely gone. Because I would make the argument, and I'm really passionate about this, and I cannot urge you enough that no matter what path you take, it doesn't matter. You will need to have a professional social media presence that accompanies you through the rest of your career. And what they call this in the resume world is personal branding, because your resume is going to be part of what you will show the world, your LinkedIn profile, or your paper resume about what you've accomplished, where you studied. But that's only going to be a part of what people want to see from you. The other part is they want to see your ideas. Okay. And that is going to be so critical. So that's one of the things that you see on LinkedIn is that people who are not at all in media or in journalism or in communication will start sharing ideas about the industry that they're in. This is something that happened. This is why it's important. And they are effectively becoming like media people, but they are in their own industries. So LinkedIn is a great place to do that. And you start to build a following. But what people get to see from you, and I said this earlier about when you're applying for jobs, the most important part is that you can show people that you're capable. And just because you got good grades in school and you did a degree at this university does not prove that you are capable, because everybody can do that at some level that you're competing against, okay? But again, to go back to my 99-1 rule, only 1% of the population is taking that initiative to create content. So I cannot urge you enough to be in that 1%, and you will automatically separate yourself from the competition. And I will tell you that in every single one of the countries that you live in today, because this is the case in all of Africa, it's the case in Europe, and it's the case in the United States. I just saw today that in South Africa, the unemployment rate is 30%. Now, South Africa is a more diversified economy than almost anywhere on the continent. So if South Africa has an unemployment rate of 30%, it's probably significantly higher in many of the countries you come from. And that's not going to get any better. So the competition for the few jobs that are going to be available in whatever space you're in is only going to go up. So you're going to have to make that extra effort to separate yourself from the competition. And telling stories and thought leadership and your ideas is super important. Now, people will say, you know, you're 19 years old, you're 20, 21, whatever. You don't have a whole lot of life experience. They say, well, what does anybody want to hear from me, right? Remember that you represent Africa today. The median age on the continent is 19.7 years old, okay? And I think in Nigeria, it's around 17 years old. This is a continent of young people. And if we don't hear the voices of young people, which we really don't, because still to this day, most of the discussion about Africa is done by old people, 40, 50, 60-year-olds, right? So your voice is incredibly important to help shape the narrative about what's important to your generation, what values are important, especially now in this COVID era, and soon hopefully will be the post-COVID era. Everything changes, everything resets. All of the rules that happened before COVID are now broken. Everything that goes in the next COVID, we have no idea. So your generation and this moment right now is, again, 2020 is the year, is going to be how we shape the future and how we think about the post-COVID era. So you're writing about this, whatever you're interested in, is going to be so important to help teach the rest of the world about where Africa, where Rwanda, where Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana goes. Because we don't know. And you have no more insight into this than the president does, because he doesn't know either. Nobody knows. So that's an important thing for you saying, from my point of view, here in school and here in the workforce and here on the street, this is what I'm seeing. Start writing that down. And there's something called the 18-month rule, okay? I'm gonna give you a couple rules today, okay? So I gave you the 99-1 rule, and I'm gonna give you the 18-month rule. The 18-month rule is that nobody cares about you. For 18 months, nobody's gonna look at what you're writing. Nobody's gonna read anything you have to say. Nobody is going to listen to what you have to say on a podcast, on a video, whatever it is. Nobody will care for about a year to a year and a half. Why? It's not personal to you. It's not because what you say isn't interesting or good. But you know, when you go to a YouTube page and you see they've got 3 videos and they've only been doing it for 6 weeks, you think to yourself, not that interesting. I'll come back later. Or you go to a Facebook page and they've got 10 followers, you're like, not so good, okay? Your mother's gonna listen to you, your friends are gonna listen to you, and my mother, by the way, after about 2 shows, she stopped listening to me, so. But the point is that that year and a half when nobody's paying attention to you is your blessing, it's your gift. Because it allows you to find your voice. It allows you to work out, make all the mistakes, to sound stupid, to say things that are incorrect. You don't want people to look at you right now, okay? Now, a lot of people, they say, I'm starting my YouTube channel and I have no followers. Because in the beginning, it takes time to build that audience. But you got to work through. And again, it's just like anything that you do in life, whether it's a sport, whether it's a skill, whether it's school, it takes time to do it. So the 18-month rule is for that first year, you got to figure things out. And boy, after a year, it starts to pick up, because once people come back and they come to your YouTube channel and they see 55 shows, they're like, wow, that's pretty cool. The search engines reward you, by the way, the algorithms, they give you some praise and they say, wow, this person is now producing all the time and people are linking to this person. We're going to elevate you in Google, and people start coming to you that way. But the most important thing that you have to do, and this is where most of you will fail, I promise you, is consistency. So a lot of people will come out and say, I'm going to do a blog, I'm going to do a podcast, I'm going to do a Twitter page, I'm going to start writing on LinkedIn. They're going to do all of that stuff. And they do it amazingly for 2 months. Whoa. And then all of a sudden an exam comes, or they get sick, or their grandmother gets sick, or whatever. Life happens. Life just gets in the way. And a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, no content. And then all of a sudden you come back after 2 weeks, you write something, it's a little bit hard, you've lost a little bit of the energy and the momentum, you write something, then another week goes by, and all of a sudden it just fails off. Boom, Google doesn't like you anymore. Google stops putting you up higher, your traffic goes down, your energy goes down, the feedback you get, and that's where most people quit. I would say that 90+% people will start and then stop. So the few of you who are going to be consistent, and whatever consistent is to you, you have to make sure it fits within your life. So if you're going to do something once a week, you're going to drop an essay on Thursdays, on LinkedIn, commit to once a week. Every Thursday, there's an essay that people can find from you. If it's Twitter, every day on Twitter, something short. And maybe you can't do everything at once. You can't do LinkedIn, podcast, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of that. Then pick one that you can fit. So for me, Twitter is very good because it's short, it's quick, it's easy. I don't have to spend a lot of time for it. But one of the reasons why we are successful is not because we are smarter than the next person. It's because we just kept delivering every single week. We promised a podcast would drop every week, and it did. I promised a newsletter will drop at 6 a.m. Washington time, and it hits on the dot at 6 a.m. Washington time. I promised 2 podcasts. I promise all this every Monday to Friday. I give Twitter updates on China, Africa, and I never miss a week. Even on vacation, I post a little bit just to make sure I keep people there. So consistency is really important. So the 3 rules so far that we've talked about, 99-1, 18-month, and consistency. And I have one more before the end of our discussion.
Good. I'm muted. Sorry, folks. Sounds good. So I see Molly, your question in the chat. Thanks so much for that. I want to start off with if someone wants to speak up so that Eric hears from you, hears someone's voice rather than me reading out a question, that would be great.
That would be great. Hey, Molly.
Hi. Yeah, so Molly, please go ahead and, kind of share your question.
Yes, and where are you from, Molly? And how old are you?
I'm from Ghana.
And how old are you?
I'm 21.
Wonderful. Okay. Go ahead and say your question.
So my question is, in a space where there are continually new voices, new perspectives, how do you maintain a personal voice from the others?
There is no secret to this. Okay. I can't give you a rule or a formula. What the voice comes is through that practice and just that every day or every week creating the content. And where you start and where you end up are going to be 2 very different places. And this is, again, why that 18-month rule is so important. So you have to speak about your experiences and your worldview and your perspective. As soon as you try and be something else and try to pretend to be something else, not suggesting that you necessarily would do that, but someone wants to be like, they see a YouTuber and they want to copy that person, or they see a newspaper and then you start to look and come off as fake. So you have to kind of go back to your personal experience. Now, what that means, I talked about at the beginning in terms of all the reading that you do and the consistent content that you make, you will find that your voice is going to just come out. Okay. And you can't try and direct it. It just naturally happens. This is where your interests lie. So I'll give you one example. When I first started blogging, I had this site called China Talking Points. And I was going to cover China environment, China military, China Africa, China, you name it. And what I did is I found that I just kept coming back to Africa because I was so interested in Africa. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to forget all the other things. And I'm just going to focus on China and Africa. And that was really something a great decision for me. But I had to go through the 1 or 2 years of doing that. So again, feel free to experiment in different topics, and you will naturally be guided to where your interest is. And what is that interest? How do you know? It's when you get that tingle in your stomach, which says, "Ooh, this is fun. I want to do this." And you just kept doing that more and more, then let that go. That's where you want to go and do that. And that's your personal voice. You talked about a lot of voices coming into the space. A lot of voices do come into the space, but they don't last very long. Okay. As I said, people will start blogs and then they will stop. People will start YouTube and then they will stop. So don't be intimidated by the fact that there are a lot of people coming in. You're not trying to compete with any of them. You're just trying to do your thing. And that's really the most important thing, is just get excited about your thing and what you're interested in. And yeah, there's going to be other people who come in, but don't worry about it. And try to find a space that you have some room to move. Okay. So if I did a blog on China-US relations, that would be tough because there are so many people doing China-US. There are so many people doing African football, right? If you did an African football blog, you would, but if you did an Africa-China tech or Africa-China green or Africa, you pick one part of the relationship and that's where you start. And you do a Google search for other people in that space. There's nobody there. or if you're in, that's where your interests are. So try and do a little bit of research, find a niche or a part of the space that isn't quite so congested, that there's so many people, and then you can have a bigger impact. Of course, most important, you have to follow where your passion is, because at this point right now, if you don't bring the passion to it, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You're going to quit after 6 weeks, 7 weeks, because let me tell you something, it's really hard work. We see the YouTubers and we see the influencers who have millions of followers, and they look so happy and they make it look so easy. And what you don't understand is behind the scenes, they are working 14, 15 hours a day to make that happen. Okay. It's hard work. Okay. So you got it. That's why the passion is really important. If you're not passionate about the topic you pick, this thing is, you're never going to be successful. Okay. And whatever the topic is, go with it. Don't try and be like, well, I'm picking this topic because that will get me a job, or that will get me views and likes and things like that. That's a stupid reason, because you'll end up quitting in a few months. And don't listen to your parents either, because they don't know. Okay. Pick what's in your heart.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Eric. And thanks for starting us off, Molly.
Yeah.
Betty in Cameroon. Betty has such a very, interesting and encouraging story. Betty, if you want to tell Eric a little bit about yourself, and then go ahead and ask your question. Can you unmute yourself? You're muted now. Oh, and now we can't hear you. Put up your volume a little bit. We still can't hear you. That's
my phone, Betty.
We can hear you now.
Hello, Eric.
Hello, Betty.
Okay, I am Betsy from Cameroon. I am 27 to 28 years old. I actually went to the university at age 26 because I really had it in my heart as a burden to impact my community and make sure I achieved my dreams. That's why I never gave up, irrespective of the age, irrespective of some difficulties around me. I still kept on pushing, and
wonderful.
I am here today, final year student in economics and management.
Wonderful.
So,
congratulations.
Soon to be graduating soon. I'll be graduating soon, yeah. Thank you so much, Eric. Okay, listening to you, I want to fit into that 1% of content creators. Very good content creator.
Yes, that's good. So ask your question.
That's a great question. And it's the simple, most basic question. Okay. What does it take? Okay. And the good news for you, not very much. Okay. So pick something small. Don't start and say, I want to be the next AOC or the next China Africa project, and I want to try and do everything. Okay. Because you will fail. It's simply too much work. It takes too much time, and that's not it. Start small and build on one on top of another. So you're interested in economics and management. I would recommend that LinkedIn is a very good place for you to start, okay? LinkedIn has two ways of posting content, okay? Number one is you can do a post, what they call. And LinkedIn has a post, and it allows you for 1,500 characters, okay? Now, on Twitter, you get 280 characters, but on LinkedIn, you get 1,500 characters in a post. That's the maximum. Now, what's great about that length of 1,500 is it's basically 3, maybe 4 sentences, 2 paragraphs. It's very short. And it allows you to express one idea. That's basically it. And what I call this is a thought bubble. Okay, so on LinkedIn, I go and I post a thought bubble. Now, on LinkedIn, what people want, the only thing people want, they don't want to see a picture of your puppy. They don't want to hear what you had to eat. They don't want to see your boyfriend. They don't want to see any of that on LinkedIn. What people want to see on LinkedIn is content that makes them smarter. Okay, that's what they want to see. They want to learn something. People go to LinkedIn to learn something. So, on LinkedIn, using a post, What I would recommend is once a day, go and write something interesting about the Cameroonian economy, about the Cameroonian market, about Cameroonian technology, about Cameroonian management, about something very specific to Cameroon that you have some expertise in and some knowledge, okay? There's so much going on. Don't start writing about, what's going on in Morocco. Don't start writing about what's going on in Tanzania with the election of John Magufuli. I'm assuming you don't necessarily have that expertise. Write something about what you know. So people come to you and they learn something once a day from you. Now, what that can mean is that you saw an interesting article, okay? So you saw an article about, this new management approach in Cameroonian companies, and they're doing something, and you say, and then what you do is you add a little bit of spice onto that article. You give one thought, you take out from the article, you say, this was really interesting in this article. They talked about this. I've seen that also in my own experience. Boom, that's it, okay? Other days, you may have a conversation with somebody at work or at school, one of your professors, and they said something really interesting. You share that one little tiny thing, put that out, okay? The 18-month rule also applies on LinkedIn. Do not think that you are special. Do not flatter yourself that people are looking at you. They are not, but they will in about a year. You have to train LinkedIn's algorithms that you are putting out really good stuff, that people are coming and they're liking you. The other thing you have to do on any social media is you have to be active. So you have to join groups on LinkedIn, Cameroonian business, management, technology, culture, all of that. Join those groups because then your posts will show up in their feeds, which is really good. The other thing you have to do is you have to then participate with other people. So you see other thought leaders and things, you put a comment in, you put a like in, then that in the future will mean that your post will be shared with them as well. Okay, that's number one, is a post, a thought bubble. Very short, you can put a link, super easy way to start. I recommend for all of you that you do that. No matter what industry or career you're doing, you must have a strong LinkedIn page. It is the way that companies, and in Africa now, more and more companies are turning to LinkedIn to look at your profile. Okay, they don't really want paper resumes as much anymore. They will look at your LinkedIn profile. Paper resumes are still very important, but LinkedIn is becoming more important. And if you can put that layer of thought bubbles, these little tiny micro ideas, and again, you don't have to write these big, long things. Number two on LinkedIn is what's called an article. So you have a post, you have an article. Article can be as long as you want it to be, okay? It can have pictures, and that is where your blog can live, where if you have more than 1,500 characters and you're just so excited about a topic, then you will go and write an article for that, okay? And I recommend mixing it up. What's weird about LinkedIn, super, super weird, okay, is that they favor the posts over the articles, which makes no sense. You put more time in, you have more thoughtful content, but I will get thousands and thousands of views of my posts and like 600 views of my articles, which is kind of like weird because I've spent an hour writing an article and I spent 2 seconds writing a post, but that's what they do. But here's the thing, is that I can take the LinkedIn article and I can link it on Twitter, I can link it on Facebook, I can link it on all these other places. And the beauty of it is, as you are all looking for jobs now, when you start sending out links to your LinkedIn articles, they see your profile. Whoa, who wrote this? This is really good. Link, wow, this is really cool. She is, doing amazing things. And it helps you just get your name out there. So I would start, in terms of how to be a content creator, start with LinkedIn posts, do some articles, make sure your LinkedIn page looks really good, pick some topics that you're interested in, that you're passionate about, and keep it simple. One idea in that thought bubble. Okay, I'm going to give you my last rule of the day. So we have 3 rules. You're going to get number 4, and then I'll stop. Rule number 4 is the theory of 2s. Okay? There's the theory of 2s. That means the first 2 words, the first 2 sentences, and the first 2 paragraphs are the most important in anything that you write. If you don't grab the attention of the reader in the first sentence, they're gone. And you are all guilty of this. Because all of us, when we're on social media, we look at something, if we're interested, and we go, no, next, swipe, 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 boring, boring, boring. Okay? So the most important part of your writing has to be that first 1 or 2 sentences. That's all of your effort. Because if you are successful there and you grab their attention in those first 2 sentences, then you have them for the rest of the article. So as you are writing your little posts or your tweets or your Facebook or your blog articles, think of the first 2 words, the first 2 lines, and the first 2 paragraphs. If you fail at grabbing their attention in that space of the theory of 2s, they're gone. And you and I, we all do this, right? Because we have so much content coming our way. We're just swiping through life. Boring, boring, boring. But all of a sudden something cool comes. You're like, wow, they got me. I'll read that. Okay. So posts, articles, theory of 2s. I hope that was helpful.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Eric. Thank you. And thanks for asking, Betsy. So Eric, I have a question here from a couple more questions for you. We hope you can spare us a little bit more time.
Keep going. This is wonderful.
Awesome. So we have Ellen here. Ellen is currently serves as the Vice President for the Chinese Students Association at the University of Ghana, and she has a question for you as well.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Hello, Eric.
Hello, Ellen. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Please, my question is that what are some of the ways to follow in enhancing and developing one's personal voice when it comes to becoming a change agent in the media space? Thank you.
Okay, so that's a great question. And so the problem that a lot of people have, and first of all, I'm so excited, Ellen, that you said you're the Vice President of the Chinese Student Association?
Yes, please.
Are you studying Chinese?
Yes, please. Chinese with political science.
Oh, wonderful. Ni hao. How's your Chinese? Is it good?
Oh, hi hao.
还好，真的吗？哇，真好。Okay, so you have just answered my first.
我在学习呢。
真的吗？
我在学习呢。
你学习多久？
真的。
多久？
多久是什么？我不懂你的意思。
How long?
Oh, 2年。
2年. Wow. Okay. So what Ellen's doing here is one of the most important things. Okay. So speaking a language, particularly like Chinese, is going to open your mind in ways that are completely different. So, but here's the key thing in terms of being able to tell that distinctive story. Okay. And this goes back to what I talked about in terms of reading and trying to broaden where you're getting your information from. Now, too often in Africa, and I will say this particularly in Francophone Africa, this is even more severe. In Francophone Africa, so many of the ideas still come from Paris and still come from France and Belgium. And it's really important to broaden where you're getting information from. And one of the challenges that we have today, and this is really a big challenge to your generation, is that we're in these kind of bubbles that when you look at, particularly if you're getting most of your news from Facebook, Facebook is really just feeding you only things that you've already read. You have to find the sources that are different and outside of those bubbles. Really super important, okay? And that's one of the things that I do at the China Africa Project is I try and bring Chinese sources, I try to bring in Arabic sources, I try to bring in French sources, US sources, Ghanaian sources, all of it, because we all have different ways of looking at the issue. But if you're only looking at it from one way, then you're going to run into problems. And one of the challenges, particularly in African media, as somebody who sits every single day and sits on African media to be able to look for all the China stories, I go through country by country every day. I have a list of about 28, 30 countries that have the most China Africa news. And I sit for about 2 to 3 hours going through line by line of each story that's related to China. Is I find that like in Nigeria and in Ghana, what will happen is rumors start to circulate and get a life of their own. So in Nigeria this summer, it was all about the sovereignty issue and the debt trap and all of that. And it just gets repeated over and over and over again. And you have to step outside of the Nigerian media to kind of realize, well, that doesn't make sense. And let me give you an example about Nigeria. And Ghana is a very similar situation. So the conversation all summer in Nigeria was how Nigeria is going to be taken over by China, that China is going to, because there's so much loans and the debt trap, and that China is going to start seizing assets and start seizing all of these things. And a lot of people became very worried and very anxious. And in the House of Representatives, they're talking about it and they're doing hearings and all these things. And then the Debt Management Office in Nigeria released a report which showed that only 3.94% of Nigeria's total external debt is owed by China. 3.94%, only $3 billion. Nigeria is pushing up now towards $80 billion of debt, and 3 is owed to China. And then you realize, like, everything that's going on in terms of the discussion about the debt trap is about something else. It's not about China. The story is actually about Nigerian fears of losing control, Nigerian skepticism of their own leaders, the lack of trust in their own leaders, that they're not telling them the full story. This wasn't about China. And so that's, if you aren't stepping outside of that discussion, you get sucked into it. So that's going to be really important for you, is to broaden where you get your news and information from on whatever the issue is. It can be China, Africa, it can be whatever. But you have to go to lots of different sources. And it's so difficult today because Facebook has really made that more challenging, because they just keep feeding you what you already like. And they're not challenging some of your assumptions. And that's why I said at the beginning of our conversation, if you've come to this topic with your mind made up as to what China is in Africa, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Cameroon, you're halfway right probably, but you're missing the other half. And in order to find out the other half, you have to go and hunt for that information. How do you do that? Twitter is actually a really good place to do that, but Twitter's not easy to figure out. It takes some practice. And what you have to do on Twitter is you have to find the voices of people who are credible. Who are other people following? Who are good sources? And then you'll start to build some lists on Twitter. Here's my tech list. Here's my China list. Here's my Ghanaian politics list. And if you get good, credible sources, you're going to see that that's going to come from all over the place. And Twitter's a really good place. Now, Twitter can send you down to a really bad, smelly, stinky place. And you got to be careful, because Twitter, like Facebook and all social media, has good and has bad. But if you are careful about looking at the different sources, Twitter is a really good resource to quickly be able to find some of that news and information. And then, so one thing you can do is, let's say you come to me and you say, I really like what Eric is saying. I really trust Eric. Okay. I'm going to go to his Twitter page and I'm going to follow him. But if I like and I trust Eric, I'm going to also see, who is he following? Okay. And then you can look at my followers on Twitter, or who I'm following, and you can build your list from them. So that's another good way, is that you don't have to figure this out on your own. Find a few people that you like and trust, and then go to who they're following, and you can follow them, and you can start to build a list pretty quickly. But that's one way of opening your mind to really challenge some of those assumptions that you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Eric. So I have the questions are coming in rapidly.
Good.
Yes. So we have a question from Anchi. Anchi is in Cameroon. Anchi, please tell Eric a little bit about yourself and then go into your question.
Okay. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Anchi. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. So I'm Anchimbo Mdichia. I'm an economics student at the University of Yaoundé 2 SWA.
Okay.
And I eventually hope to do a master's in international relations. I'm my final year now of my degree, and I hope to do a master's in international relations with a focus on Africa-China relations.
Oh, exciting.
So my hope with this is because over the years I've been very drawn to how China is being called the miracle of development. So I'm really interested in how fast China has developed and itself over a short period of time. So my hope with doing international relations and the focus on China is to be able to learn from them to bring back to our country. So my question for you is, what advice do you have for someone who wants to bring technology from China to Africa in order to leapfrog the African continent as a whole?
Okay, good question. And I'm so excited that you brought up the development story in China. Let me tell you that the first time I went to China was 1989. Okay. And in 1989, when I first went to China, when we had to go get food, I went to Beijing, the capital. Okay. And I was there and I was staying with my host family, and we went out to go get food for dinner for that night. And we had these ration coupons. Okay. So we could only get a kilo of rice. We got a bottle of oil. That's all we got. In 1989, it was so poor that you couldn't get enough. There was not enough food for everybody that they had to ration it out. They had no cars on the street. It was only bicycles for the most part. The clothes that people wore were either black, brown, blue, or black, brown, or blue, basically. And for me to be able to watch what China has done from being poorer than most African countries. In 1989, China was poorer than most African countries are today. To go from that to one of the most advanced societies on the planet, that's the second largest economy, is unbelievable. And there are some amazing stories and insights that you can take from what the Chinese experience is. Okay, but China's a very unique place. It's a communist, totalitarian, authoritarian country. It's a Confucian culture. And so much of what happens in China is really unique to China that is very difficult to bring over to a place like Cameroon. Okay, so you can't take the political system of China and bring it to Cameroon. And even though Paul Biya, he does a little bit of that. He tries to, but it wouldn't work. Okay. So what you have to do is, number one, is to figure out what part of the China development story do you think would actually fit in Cameroon? That's number one. And that's not everything. So, China will tell you, look at our story. It's amazing. Everybody should copy us. All throughout Africa, they're always saying, emulate us, do what we did. But that's not always that easy because of so much is unique to China. But think about a couple different areas, and we focus a lot on agriculture. Okay. Agriculture is actually one area where the Chinese have a lot that they can teach Africa, because Chinese agriculture is not like European and American agriculture, where we have big, massive, mega industrial farms. Africa will never have that. Okay, and China doesn't have that. Most of Chinese farms are small scale farmers, just like in Africa. So you can start to learn about how are they doing land management, how are they doing the market, enhancements, how are they doing fertilizer, all of the different things about agriculture, because Africa's future is going to be very much about agriculture. The biggest challenge right now that the continent faces is you don't produce enough food to feed yourselves. And you're spending what limited hard-earned currency you have, foreign currency, that's then going out to buy food and then bringing that back into it. And Africa has the potential to be a food powerhouse, but it needs to have good regulation, governance. It needs to have good land management, good policies, all of that. China actually has quite a bit of examples on that. For countries, and Cameroon, I don't think is in this situation, who are short of water, China has done amazing things on desertification, for example, and learning from how to push back the deserts and how to deal in low water environments is something China has been incredibly successful. So on that, how to use technology in a low cost, highly effective way is something that the Chinese are very good at. So your challenge in looking at the Chinese development space is being able to separate out what is uniquely Chinese that cannot be brought over and what is something that is applicable to Cameroon, for example. Because the situation in Cameroon is really, really different than what it is in China. The other thing which I'll point out, and this is where it's really important, is the biggest challenge facing Africa today, I would say more than anything, and this is especially true in Cameroon, is governance. Is corruption, poor governance, poor regulation, poor implementation of regulation, inconsistent. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, the other problem that we face, and this is the opportunity for all of you, is that you are going to be graduating into a world where the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement will be a reality. So Africa now will be able to, Cameroon will be able to trade with Kenya, will be able to trade with Ghana with no tariff. That's the dream. The problem is, though, is there's not enough product diversification in Africa. That means, is Rwanda going to sell Kenya coffee? That's ridiculous. Cameroon produces a lot of oil. Who are you going to sell that to in Africa? So now the key question is figuring out what are the products that you can sell to other African countries. And too often in Africa today, everybody's making the same raw materials. How much cocoa can you buy? Can you sell? How many mangoes can you sell? How much manganese can you sell? All of that, a lot of countries are producing. So trying to figure out how you can benefit from the AFCTA is going to be really important. The last thing I'm going to point out is something that's starting to happen on the Chinese side. So the Chinese think tanks now are starting to think about how can they connect the AFCTA, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, with the Belt and Road. That becomes really interesting because the Belt and Road is all about from the port out to the global market. The AFCTA is about moving things around in Africa. So if you can get a good from Cameroon to the port of Mombasa or the port of Dar es Salaam easily, and then from the port of Dar es Salaam to get it out to the world on the Belt and Road, that becomes really interesting. So for someone like you who's going to do a master's in China-Africa kind of business and economics, thinking about those connections in the next generation, which is AFCTA, BRI, post-COVID, that's where you want to be. Don't look back, because looking back will not help you because the rules are different now. Looking back, you didn't have the AFCTA. That's going to be really important. So picking out what part of the China development story is good for you and unique, that's hard. And that means you have to really study the China development story in detail to understand what it is. And then being able to think about how do you apply it, putting pressure on your own governments for improved governance, and then diversifying African Cameroonian exports so that they can sell more in Africa and then they connect to the Belt and Road. Those are the different pieces that I would recommend in terms of your interest. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. I'm like jotting down notes as, as much as our students are. So Eric,
you're recording it.
Yes. So we have a couple more questions here.
Sure.
We're going to take, let's say 3 more, and then perhaps we don't want to take up all of your evening. So 3 more. And then, okay, awesome. So our next question is actually from Esther Olubuse in Nigeria. I want to commend her publicly for taking great initiative this last week. We invited her to share her thoughts on the ongoing issues in Nigeria. And she shared a really, I think courageous article in terms of what China has to say about what's going on in Nigeria. So she has a question right now. I'm going to post the article in the chat that everyone, and perhaps you can also take a look at it. It was really fascinating to hear a young Nigerian voice kind of come forward at this time, especially because there's so much going on in Nigeria. Esther, so you can unmute yourself and tell Eric a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to tell him, and then go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Esther.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Afternoon, yeah. Okay, my name is Esther from Nigeria. I'm currently studying law in one of the state universities here, and since my exposure to this, I wanted to know more, to know if we Africans are on the safe side or if this is some kind of modern exploitation or some kind of good gift or something. I'm sure you're getting what I'm trying to say. So recently I wrote an article about, I think last month, we embittered and well-meaning Nigerians took to the streets to protest against bad governance, police brutality and all that. And while these were going on, leaders from different countries gave their solidarities, their support, kind words, gestures, some even donated foods and all that. But I still find it amusing, or will I rather, I don't even know the adjective to use, why China stayed mute about this. So, coming from a country that is so committed to our continent, I feel they should be among the first country to at least know, you people shouldn't treat these people this way.
Nope.
If we'll be giving
Nope, 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 nope.
Okay,
I don't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
okay, okay. So I've always wanted to get the view from a non-African and non-Chinese standpoint.
Sure.
Let me know if
Good.
probably I'm exaggerating, or I'm just speaking out of points, or I'm just expecting more from where I should be.
Okay.
getting
It's
less
a
or
great
some-
question. Okay, so let me start that. When I was living in Kinshasa, people would say there's a word, and I don't know if we have any Quinoa in the group. Do you have any Quinoa? Any Congolese here today? No. There's a word in Lingala called mundele, and I'm sure in most African dialects there's the same word. And mundele means basically, it's kind of not a nice way of saying a white foreigner. Okay, so basically everybody who's not a Quinoa is a mundele, and especially people like me. Okay. And one of the mistakes that the Congolese would do is they would call the Chinese mundele. And what that, and the mindset was, well, if they're not kind of Quinoa or Congolese or Black African, then you're basically white. That's the mindset. That when you think of a foreigner, what comes to mind? Well, someone like me, a white guy, right? And here's the problem with that thinking, is that the Chinese are not whites. The Chinese are not Europeans. The Chinese are not Americans. They're not playing by the same set of rules. And it's so important that we really internalize that, okay? And they're playing by a completely different, so your expectations that the Chinese would behave like the Europeans and the Americans because that's the way they've done things, you need to put that aside, okay? Because they don't play by those rules. And if you follow my newsletter and my website, one of the things I'm constantly doing is explaining like this, they're playing by a different set of rules. They're approaching the world in a different mindset. You have to remember that the Chinese were the victims of the same colonial powers that you were. The French colonized China, the Portuguese colonized China, the British colonized China, the Americans even colonized parts of China. So they come at the world in a very different mindset. Okay, about your article as to why the Chinese were silent on SARS, okay? In 1955 or 56, I forget the exact year, there was the premier of China whose name was Zhou Enlai. He came up with a concept of the non-interference doctrine. And the idea was that it was opposed to the way that the colonial powers would interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. And you see this today. The British, the French, the Americans are constantly interfering in African countries. The French launched an attack in the Central African Republic or deployed troops into Mali without the United Nations. Okay, but they interfered in the internal affairs of other countries. China said, we're not going to do that. We don't want you interfering in our internal affairs, and we're never going to interfere in other countries' internal affairs. And they did that partially to oppose the colonial powers at the time in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, who were constantly, during the Cold War, the Americans were interfering in your country's affairs all the time, as the Soviets were. And the Chinese said, we're not going to do that. The second thing is they will never comment on SARS and on the violence in Nigeria. And you should never expect them to. Why? Because they don't want Nigeria to comment on what they're doing in Xinjiang, in Tibet, in Hong Kong. China does a lot of bad things to its own people. And if they start commenting on what police brutality is going on in Nigeria, then Nigeria may one day feel the right to be able to say, well, you were saying bad things about us in Nigeria. I'm going to turn around and say bad things about you in Xinjiang or in Hong Kong. And that the Chinese do not want. So this non-interference doctrine is super important. And you can find it, go onto Wikipedia, look up non-interference doctrine, and it will come up and it will explain that philosophy. So the expectation that you have that the Chinese are going to behave like the Europeans or the Americans needs to be changed. They are not the same kind of mundele. They are mundele, they are foreigners, but they're not white foreigners. They don't come from a Judeo-Christian background in terms of their morality. They come from a Confucian background, very different. So the way that they see the world is very, very different. So when they see police brutality in place like Nigeria, it's not because they don't care. It's not necessarily because they're shocked, but they're never going to say anything because of the non-interference doctrine. And they really, really believe that deep in their heart.
Eric, do you think, we've already talked about the fact that Africa's youth is, let's say, Africa's population is very young. Do you think that with the majority now of, let's say, young Africans expecting China to say something, would that cause a change in their kind of ideology in the next decade? You don't think they'll defer, even if the Africans are demanding that they speak on these things?
So do you remember what happened in Guangzhou in April?
Right.
And there was this huge, for those of you who don't remember, there was this discrimination against Blacks and Africans, because it was also African Americans and British-born Blacks. And so it was Blacks and African Americans, lots of discrimination. African civil society and social media was just raging it. And the Chinese didn't budge. You have to remember that this is the oldest continuous civilization on the planet, okay? 5,000 or 4,000 years. They have an enormous amount of confidence. They are under incredible attack all the time from the United States, from Europe, from other countries in Asia over things like Xinjiang, Tibet, Taiwan, June 4th, the South China Sea. They are not going to buckle under pressure of you criticizing them. It just will not work. That is not the way you get the Chinese to change. I mean, I'm not saying don't criticize
them to change.
Well, how do you get anybody to change? You can't really force people to change. That's at the end of the day, whether it's your girlfriend or boyfriend, your mother, your father, or China. Getting other people to change their ways is not something that's going to do it. And so, again, I'm not saying don't criticize the Chinese, because if you feel it's important to you to criticize, you have the right to do that, especially as free people. You have the right to do that, and you should. But one of the things you can do is to say, and this is, again, that we take the case of Nigeria, it doesn't mean that Nigeria always has to toe the Chinese line. You don't, so Nigeria doesn't have to sign the letters supporting Xinjiang or Hong Kong. Nigeria can stand up for itself and say, and this is the burden of Nigeria. Nigeria is the most powerful country in Africa today. Nigeria has a voice that Malawi and Togo and Sao Tome do not have. It's the largest consumer market in Africa. So speaking out on behalf of the continent is a role that Nigeria has. South Africa for a long time has had that role, but South Africa and Cyril Ramaphosa are not playing that role today. Kenya has had that role to some extent, but Kenyatta is not playing that role. Buhari is not either. So this is the chance for young people to say, we don't have to necessarily go with the Chinese on everything. So on human rights, you may not agree with the Chinese. On religious freedom, you may not agree with the Chinese. On the way that they do certain things, you don't have to agree with the Chinese. And I think you have to express that voice in a constructive way. One of the things, I criticize the Chinese quite a bit. I am not shy about criticizing the Chinese. And my site is still open in China. People follow me in China quite a bit and they engage. If you are critical in a constructive way, you can have that discussion with them, okay? I'll give you an example. Last week, I've been writing a lot about how China and Zambia right now with the debt default. And I wrote an article very, very critical of China, which said that you are hurting Zambians with the lack of transparency, all this hush-hush stuff between you and Edgar Lungu. And it's the same thing in Nigeria between Buhari and the Chinese, that they hide everything behind secrecy, okay? I said, you're hurting the average person with that, because here's why. The bond markets do not understand what's going on. They cannot assess the risk in Zambia because they don't know the extent of the loans. So what ends up happening? They force the risk premium up, which is the interest on the bonds goes up. So that means that Zambians now have to pay more to borrow money. And this is across Africa. Africa faces an unfair discrimination in the bond markets because of the risk premium. That the same amount of risk in Brazil versus in Kenya, you will pay 15 to 20% more to borrow money. And the lack of transparency is a big reason for it. And it was very interesting. That article, I wrote it in a very constructive way. I'll share it on the chat. I got really a lot of feedback from the Chinese foreign ministry going, we never thought about it that way. Okay. You know, I mean, people were really like, wow, that's really nice. But you'll see the tone that I take is not, China's the most evil thing in the world. It's terrible. I hate China. That they just shut down. They won't even listen to you because nobody would. If I told you that you're a jerk and you're terrible, well, I'm just not going to listen to you anymore. Mute. But if you say, listen, I get it. You have reasons to be kind of secret. You know, imagine if the Chinese opened up their books, you know that the Americans would be there first in line to whack them over the head for every little thing in it. Okay, there are good reasons why they're hiding stuff. But you cannot come away and say, we love Africa, we're great for Africa, we only want to help African people, and you and your behavior is resulting in higher costs, which is hurting African people and Zambian people. They took that criticism very well. So think about the tone that you take. And I urge you not to agree with everything the Chinese say. You shouldn't, because not everything they do is good. Again, the good and the bad sit side by side one another. That's the way you're going to get change to happen. But if you're expecting to criticize the Chinese, shame the Chinese, embarrass the Chinese, and then they're going to change, not going to happen. Will not happen.
That's great perspective. Thanks again for that. So I think we're going to close off, or at least with you, Eric. We don't want to take up your whole evening again with with our final.
I can talk about this all night, so it's wonderful.
I know. Our last question then would be from Nadine, unless I get something else. Yes, Esther is agreeing with you here with claps. So
okay, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so it's good to know that Esther has kind of really internalized, because she asked a question and internalized your contributions on that. So the question we have here is from Nadine. Nadine, and actually we have one other ambassador in Rwanda. And you know, the two of them have very particular interest in the business side of things. Perhaps in getting things from China into their country in Rwanda. Nadine, I'm going to allow you to unmute yourself. Please go ahead and tell Eric a little bit about yourself, your interest, and then ask your question. I don't know if she can. So Nadine, are you there? Or maybe I can go ahead and read her question. So knowing what I know about her and our other ambassador in China, there seems to be, I don't know what it is, but there seems to be a particular interest for our friends in Rwanda about getting products into
yeah. And I know why.
I would love your perspective on why, because I don't.
Rwanda has a very special relationship with a province called Zhejiang. Now, many of you probably do not know what Zhejiang province is. And it's very interesting because I remember I tweeted about 6-7 months ago that the provincial governor of Zhejiang was touring Rwanda, Nigeria, and a couple other African countries. And I got these kind of like dismissive comments from people in Rwanda of like, what do we care if a Chinese provincial governor is coming here? I said, well, it's very interesting because this particular province has a GDP that is bigger than the entire African continent. Wow. Just one province.
Wow.
Okay, and they were like, oh, okay. Number two, Zhejiang is home to, the capital of Zhejiang is a city called Hangzhou. And Hangzhou is the most important city for you to know except for Beijing. Why? Because it is the headquarters of Alibaba. And Alibaba just in case you didn't know, is the largest e-commerce company in the world. On Tuesday, which was Singles Day, which is 11/11. So they have this little thing called 11/11. And what it was is 11/11 Singles Day was this idea of being the anti-Valentine's Day. So, you know, on Valentine's Day, you buy your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, you buy them a present, okay? And then all the single people are all sitting there feeling kind of sad that they have nobody to give presents to. So Alibaba came up with this idea on November 11th, because it looks like two single people standing next to each other on the date 11/11. We're going to make it so that you buy something for yourself. Now, it started out as a cool little thing. This past Tuesday, I don't know if you guys heard about this, they did $75 billion of sales in one 24-hour period. Wow. Just one company, $75 billion in one. So we're talking about $3 billion an hour. Okay, so it is, the scale of Alibaba is unbelievable. So when the governor of Hangzhou comes to Rwanda and says, we want to really prioritize the trading relationship between Zhejiang and Rwanda, that's super important. So besides Alibaba and Hangzhou, there's another city in that's very important. I'll write it down here for you. It's called Yiwu, okay? And I'm sure many of you have probably not heard of Yiwu. But Yiwu is home to the second largest African population in China after Guangzhou. And it is now the second largest port city for trade between China and Africa. And Yiwu is incredibly important in terms of China-Africa trade. Okay, so that's really important. Then there's the third thing, which is something called the EWTP. EWTP. So EWTP is the Electronic World Trade Program, which is a program that Alibaba started with Rwanda to facilitate trade between Rwanda and China on Alibaba. And products from Rwanda would go to Yiwu and then be sold into Zhejiang and into the China market. And this has really taken off. And they did this amazing sale earlier this year, and I'll send you guys a link to it, where they brought 2 tons of Rwandan coffee over, and they did a live stream on Taobao, which Taobao is Alibaba's kind of electronic e-commerce platform. And they sold 2 tons. Does anybody know? And I see you, Bridget, nodding your head, so I think you may know the answer to this. They sold 2 tons of coffee, get this, in less than 60 seconds. In less than 60 seconds, 2 tons of coffee, poof, gone. And everybody in Rwanda went, oh my, if we sold 2 tons of coffee in less than 60 seconds, the potential is enormous. And so there's now in China, in big cities, in Shanghai, Guangzhou, Beijing, Shenzhen, there's something called Guerrilla Coffee, which is a brand of Rwandan coffee that they're opening up coffee shops and things like that. So there's a lot of excitement in Rwanda because of EWTP, because of Yiwu, because of the Zhejiang governor coming there, that this relationship between Rwanda. Then there was the inland dry container port. So Rwanda opened up an inland dry container port because Rwanda has a small problem. It doesn't actually have any oceans that it can connect to. So these dry container ports are really important. And guess who was a big investor in the dry container port? Alibaba, through EWTP. So you can start to see the relationship kind of tie. And one of the things about the Paul Kagame government, there are many problems with the Kagame government, okay? So I'm not a huge defender of the Kagame government, but there are something that he does incredibly well is he focuses on business and he focuses on trade and he focuses on clean government and he has good efficient and he has good infrastructure that he's focused on. He's taken the model that's worked so well here in Asia, in Vietnam, in Singapore, in Korea, and also in China, and he's brought it to places like Kigali. And he's been very business-minded, and he's been recognizing that bringing over people like the provincial governor of Zhejiang is really important. So all of that together has created this culture of business between Rwanda and China in focusing specifically on Alibaba. By the way, we interviewed the program manager for EWTP at Alibaba in Hangzhou. He's a wonderful guy. So I really hope you'll take a look at that, and I can send links to that as well. But if you look for EWTP on China Africa Project, you'll find that that interview. And he talks a lot about the program and why Rwanda is so special for that. So we're very excited about what's happening in Rwanda. And I hope that other African countries will look at the example, and that might be some inspiration as well.
Wow, this is such great perspective, because I didn't know why all our Rwandan ambassadors had this very specific interest in the business space. And I know Nadine Nadine is very happy to hear that. And that's the intention behind this program, right? That in bringing together young people from across the continent, we can all get perspective as to what's going on. A lot of folks in Ghana, young people in Ghana, don't know the kind of opportunities that perhaps are more present in places like Rwanda. And why the relationship between Rwanda and China may be very different from what we see in Nigeria, Ghana, etc.
Very different. And each country, and even within a country, the relationship is different. So so a country as big as Nigeria, that certain states have different relationships with China. So Kaduna State and Osun State have different relationships. So it's not even just Nigeria. It's that within provinces and states, you can have differences as well. It's very complicated.
That's powerful. That's very powerful to know. So I'll ask Nadine's question to close out. Nadine was Nadine's question is, or Nadine, can you come on voice now? I don't want to read your question. Are you there? I know she's there, but maybe okay, go ahead.
I'm there. So thank you. I was asking if it can be easy for Rwandese to have a company from China to be the ambassador, like in Rwanda, like selling their products in Rwanda.
Yes and no. So again, to sell a product in any country requires that you understand the market, the consumers, you have knowledge of the distribution networks. It's very complicated. And that's not just for the Chinese, that's for everybody. So my understanding is that in a country like Rwanda, it's actually easier than it is in many other African countries because again, the government has been very open to business exchanges. So it's easier on visas, it's easier to set up companies, there's fewer regulations, the governance is better. So in that sense, it's actually easier in Rwanda than say in Nigeria, where the government has made it much more complicated to do business as a whole. And that's a complaint both from Nigerians and Chinese as well. So in terms of a Chinese coming over to Rwanda, it's easier. The problem that Rwanda has is that it does not have a very large market. And so as a Chinese company looks out onto Africa and says, where are we going to set up? They're going to set up in South Africa because there's a strong legal system and it's the wealthiest market on the continent. They're going to set up maybe in Nairobi because it's access to the whole East African community market. They're going to set up in Nigeria because it's the largest domestic market on the continent. But Rwanda has a very, very small market. And so that's one of the difficulties that I think Rwanda has in attracting Chinese business. Rwanda's success is going to be not in selling a product in Rwanda, because the market is too small. Rwanda's success, I think, is going to be taking advantage of your higher literacy rates, your better education, your better infrastructure, your better governance in digital, in technology. That is going to be, I think that's going to be where Rwanda will shine. Take, for example, and Paul Kagame has used Singapore as his example. Singapore is the 13th largest economy in the world, a tiny little island. I mean, it takes an hour and a half to drive from one end of Singapore to the other end, okay? Tiny little speck of a country, but it's successful because of its banking, its services, its technology. So Rwanda is not going to be a country that's going to have big manufacturing, big domestic market. That's just not what Rwanda's fate is going to be. You don't have the population for it. But because you have one of the best infrastructures now on the continent, you also have it's attracting high-tech talent, it's developing high-tech infrastructure, then it can serve the rest of the continent and even, for example, France in terms of outsourcing back-end technology into French-speaking markets in Switzerland and France and Belgium and things like that, big opportunities. But it's not necessarily going to be where a Chinese company will set up an ambassador to sell something in Rwanda, because I think the market's just too small and their resources are too limited. Africa, the biggest problem is it's a very big continent with a lot of people. So resources have to be spread very, very thin. And so I think that will not be it. But if you establish yourself as the services center of Africa, where you can do professional services, accounting, consulting, all the advising. And because Rwanda is such a hospitable place, it's also a nice place to live. It's a beautiful place to live, very comfortable. And so I think that's a draw as well to bring Chinese to come.
Thank you so much, Eric. So Nadine, I hope that answered your question.
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, so let me just push a little bit further, Eric, just as a closing point. I think Nadine is interested particularly in how young people then, how someone like him, someone like her can take advantage of that idea.
So
right?
I think okay, so the most difficult part is that so many people in Africa are still focused, and just like in the Caribbean, as I mentioned, on their main foreign relations being with Europe and the US. And so if you start to learn the language, learn the Chinese culture, to learn the Chinese history, so that when they come, you are the person that can be one of those bridges in between Rwandan culture and Chinese culture. You're going to find an enormous amount of success because there are simply not enough people who do that right now. Okay, that is a huge shortage in Africa today, is people who understand Chinese culture, politics, history, all of that. And so being that bridge will give you opportunities. There is no doubt about it, because learning Chinese and understanding the Chinese culture is really, really, really difficult. It takes a lot of time. I've been doing it for 35 years now. I've been studying Chinese. In fact, I had my Chinese lesson just today. I still study Chinese twice a week. I have a tutor. I read Chinese books. I'm constantly doing it, and I still don't know anything. Okay. So, but because I have a little bit of that background, I am able to have these conversations with Chinese that they feel more comfortable with. And so I would really recommend that you take that first step while you're still in school to start learning about the Chinese culture, people, history, all of that language, so that when they come, you're the person who can stand up and say, I can help you. And you can be that ambassador and that bridge between the two. If you don't have that, it's going to be almost difficult and impossible, because you don't bring any extra value to them. And bear in mind too, something really important. The first generation of Chinese that were in Africa for, say, the past 10 years, they were the first to go overseas. They didn't know anything about Africa. They didn't speak any of the languages. They didn't understand the culture. We're now getting into the second generation. We're now getting to people who've lived and worked in Africa for 5, 10, 15 years. We're getting to people who have married in Africa. Their children are being raised in Africa. Their children speak the languages, okay? Whether they're married to Africans or they're two Chinese expatriate families, their children are becoming acculturated. So they are learning very quickly too. The relationship that you're going to be in the China-Africa space is going to be very different than the relationship your parents had in the China-Africa space. Because the Chinese, there's a young generation of Chinese now that are coming up who are smarter, more sophisticated, and it will be very dangerous for Rwanda or any country, Cameroon, if the Chinese know more than you do. If they know more about you than you know about them, then when you sit down to negotiate, you're not equals. So it's really important that all of you really raise your game on China, because they're working hard to raise their game.
We couldn't have ended on a better note. Eric, thank you so much.
Thank
for this hour. What are we? We're almost at the 2
hour
hour mark. Yeah.
And I say thank you for the last few people who hung in there for it all, so, Richard, Angie, Ellen, Janet, Nadine, Odubuse, thank you so much for taking the time. It was an honor to be able to speak with you all. I put my email address there. Reach out to me. I don't always, as Bridget knows, sometimes during the week, I don't get back very quickly, but I promise you that I always get back. So if there might be a delay of a few days, but don't feel like I'm ignoring you. I write your name down on a list and I go, oh, I'm running, and then I catch up with you. But you can ask me any question, anything I raised today. You say, you said about this and that and this. Can you send me a link? I'm happy to do that. And if you have more questions, please let me know. And I can set up a call with you to talk about this in more detail. I genuinely love working with students and young people. So don't feel like you are asking me a favor or imposing on me. We'll just schedule a time to get together and chat, and I can answer any of your questions that you have. I'd be happy to do that.
Oh my gosh, Eric. Like I'm personally overwhelmed by this generosity. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I know our ambassadors are going to send you a note of thanks as well. Yeah, I'm just thank you, Eric. We're definitely going to stay in touch. These 14 young people that we have this year are definitely, I know they're ambitious, they're thoughtful, and they really want to make contributions to our continent. So I know you're going to be hearing a lot from them later on.
Yes, we'll be able to publish some of their work on China Africa Project too.
Yes, I was just going to say that, right? So folks, Eric is presenting to you all a wonderful opportunity today. If you want to begin to develop your thought leadership, begin to develop your voice online, he's offering his renowned platform for you to publish your thoughts, right? So I know Esther likes to write. I know Rire likes to write. Those of you who are really in the space of contributing, writing, please write your article, send it to me. We'll send it to Eric. I definitely want to take a look before you send it to Eric. So get it to me first. But you have this incredible place for you to develop your voice and for you to kind of really get a stake in the game here. So please do take advantage of that. Eric, any last words before we let you go?
No, I'm so proud of all of you for taking the step and for doing it. And I want you to stick with it. It's hard. It takes a long time. This is not easy what you're embarking on. I do feel sorry for you in one sense that you are going into a world which is going to be much more difficult after COVID, but that is the world that everybody's going into. And that means that you just have to be much more focused on what you're doing. You have to be much more strategic. But if you take some of these things and take advantage of some of the opportunities that Bridget's putting in front of you and that I'm putting in front of you, then there are great things that can happen. And China is going to be such an important part of your future, good and bad, and just being able to understand it. So please, again, let me know what I can do to help. And I would love to be a part of your journey as well.
Thank you so much, Eric. So we're going to let you go. Ambassadors, please hang on for a minute so that we can wrap up. Thank you so much, Eric. All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye. So I'm going to